Hi guys, today we're talking about the Koni-Omega Rapid 100. This particular one is just called a Rapid Omega 100. Whether it says Konica at the front or not depends on what year they were manufactured. Some models were marked Koni-Omega, some weren't. This has a 90mm hexagon lens. It's a beautiful little camera. This one cost me $113.50. When they were new in 1965, they cost $350. That's about $3,200 if you adjust for inflation. The value on eBay right now with this lens is about $250. This one's in excellent condition, has some minor scratches. It came complete with two film backs, a 120 roll film and a 220 roll film back, and this flash bracket. Most of them have a flash bracket, well, and this flash bracket. Most of them have this optional handle on them, and a few of them have the flash brackets. The personal significance of this camera is that it's the only medium format rangefinder camera that I have, and it, as a rangefinder, it focuses absolutely beautifully. If you can't focus through this viewfinder, you can't focus anything. These were made from 1954 to 1981. This particular model was made from 75 to 81. They were originally really designed as a press camera. In the 1970s and 80s, it was the wedding camera of choice because of its leaf shutter, sharp optics, and the rapid film advance. The rapid film advance is worth talking about. I'll just demonstrate that here in a second. In order to rapidly advance the film and take a shot, you simply pull out on this lever, push it in, and take a picture. And there should be a warning on these cameras. If you were at a press conference and there was a political candidate running for office and you were out in the audience and you did this, they would probably have all of the Secret Service on you because it sounds just like you cocked a gun. It has several features. It's left-handed, or at least it shoots from the left and cocks from the right. It's kind of interesting. It has three cold shoes on top. It has interchangeable backs, the 220 and the 120 roll film. The focus knob is calibrated for 4 different lenses. From the back of the camera, the focusing knob shows the indicator for the distance. In this case, for the 90mm lens and 135mm lens, this is what it looks like for infinity. And now I'll rotate it to 3.5 feet for the 90mm lens. From the side of the camera, looking down on the focusing knob, you can see the focusing indicator now at infinity for the 180mm lens and for the 58mm lens. Here I've refocused to 3.5 feet if we had the 58mm lens, and about 29 feet if we had the 180mm lens on. And lastly, if I rotate it clockwise all the way, pushing the lens all the way forward for the closest focusing distance, for the 100mm lens, it would be at about 12 feet. The shutter speed and f-stop, you can move them together to maintain the same exposure value. It has a dark slide, so you can change the lens or the film back without exposing any of your film. And it does parallax compensation in the viewfinder. And one of the things that Konica advertised with this camera is that pressure plate on the film stays away from the film until you actually take the picture, and then it goes down and forces the film flat. And they claim they have the flattest medium format pictures in the industry. Most wedding photographers would agree with that. If we look at the front of the camera, there's a lot going on here. There's the rangefinder window. This frosted one is for projecting the viewfinder, the frame lines, and then that's your viewfinder window. It has this hand grip with a wrist strap, and it has this little clamp on the top is for clamping a cable release to it if you wanted to. It gets a little complicated in the front here. This is the shutter speed. This is the aperture ring, and again, I'm sorry, I'll take that back. This is the aperture ring, this is the shutter speed. And again, if you had it set for a 60th of a second at f8 and wanted to increase the shutter speed, you could grab both of them and turn them together. The click stops align with each other so that you could maintain the same exposure value. To remove the lens, you have to insert a dark slide. There's a safety latch on it. This is the lock that locks the lens in place. So if you wanted to remove the lens, you have to insert a dark slide. The dark slide comes attached in the film back so that you don't lose it. Here's a picture of the bottom of the camera showing how the dark slide is saved inside the slot in the camera back. So if we pull the dark slide, which is just a placeholder in the back, we can insert it in the side here. Which sometimes isn't easy. And when it finally gets seated, it presses two little buttons in there. Here's a close-up of where the slot is that the dark slide goes in. These two shiny pieces of aluminum or steel are the buttons that get pressed to unlock the lens release. And that releases this lock, and now you can just lift the lens out of place. The lenses have the special pin up here, and that determines that this is a 90mm lens. So when it goes into that hole, it informs the viewfinder which lens you have on it for focusing. If it was a different lens, it would have another pin or no pins for the three standard lenses. And to get it back in, you simply set it in place and push down the lock. Now the other interesting thing is, if I tried to take a picture now, the shutter is locked and I can't take a picture until I remember to move the dark slide, which I'll pull out of here and place back in the film back. For long-term storage. This scale on the top of the lens is a little hard to explain. I'll put it around right side up for you. So this is a close-up view of the guide indicator plate for flash exposures. And as you look down from the top of the camera, if you focus the lens away from you, that is, if it twists out towards the closest focal distance, then the black line at the top would move forward. And if you focus to infinity and pull the lens all the way back, that black line at the top would move back with the lens. So here's a view of the plate when we're focused at 3.5 feet, which in fact is too close for even f32 with the guide number of 200 or 140. Here I am focused 6 feet away with the 90mm lens, and as you can see, at this point, if you had guide number 200, you would set it at f32, but if you had guide number 140, then you would follow the dotted line and set the aperture at f22. Here I am focused at 20 feet, and we would use somewhere between f8 and f11 for our aperture setting. Lastly, focused at infinity, a flash with a guide number of 140 or 200 is just not powerful enough for this distance with this particular lens. Now it turns out that these guides are interchangeable, and you can get a different guide if you have a different lens and you want to insert it into this camera. On this side you can see where that's the lock mechanism, and that's where the dark slide goes in, and there's two little pins there that stop you from taking the lens off unless the dark slide is seated. On this side of the camera, you can see here's on the bottom, you can see that's how you cock the shutter. So normally when you cock the shutter and advance the film, that's cocking it for you, and you would take a picture And if you wanted to take a double exposure, all you have to do is reach down and cock the shutter like that, and you could take a double exposure. This is for the sync port for your flash, and on the top of the lens right here is where you select whether it's X sync or M sync. You have to put something in that hole and move that little lever to the side to change it. I could probably do that with an ink pen if I find one. And that would change it to X sync and M sync. Here's a close-up of the sync selection lever. Currently it's in the X position for electronic flash. To change the film, there's your viewfinder on the back. To change your film, you have this little access hole, which you have this little button to unlock it, and it's hard to get at with my fingers. There's probably a spring that's missing. So this is the lock for the back. To unlock it, you just turn it that way, and then you can lift the film out, like so. And this is the Konica backplate that only goes forward when you actually take a picture. It's a pretty complicated little device. But removing and replacing the film back is way easier than playing with 4x5 sheet film. Again, you just, to get it back in, you lock it like that, put the lever down, then you can close this little lid and it'll snap shut and never bother you again. On the end of the film advance and shutter cocking lever, there's a little stick-on label that labels this as a 120 roll film back. The 220 roll film back would of course say 220 on it. This clear window on the film back also has a function of being the film reminder window, just like on 35mm cameras. When it's fully opened, there's a couple little tabs, and if you rip the back off the cardboard container that contains your 120 or 220 roll film, you can put the indicator of the film type in this little slot so it would be visible in this window. There are two indicators on this camera to tell you when the shutter is cocked and ready to fire. On the back of the camera, just above the film reminder window, there's a little round dot that's black when the shutter is not cocked and turns green if you cock the shutter. On the front of the camera, on the lens, just to the left of where it is labeled lens made in Japan, you'll see a little round circle with a hole in it. And if you cock the shutter, it should be red, and if you don't cock the shutter, it should be black. Mine is broken and always turns black, but I've seen other Koni-Omegas on the web and theirs turn red. This is the film counter, and it protects you from the exposure at the end of the film. Another neat thing about the Konica is as you advance the film, it understands that in order to get the exact spacing between film for each picture, that it has to change the amount of advance of the roll as you go along. So on the first picture, it moves it quite a ways, and on the last picture, it doesn't move it nearly as far because the spool on the right, the take-up spool, would be getting fatter and fatter and drag in more film with the film advance. As you advance it and cock it, the film counter goes up. When it eventually gets past 12, right there is a 10 locking up. Oh, it takes 10 exposures, I guess, on a 120 roll film. When you get to the end, then you have to open the back before you can advance the film anymore and take your film out. I'm using a jackknife to open this lid. Once you do that, you can zero that. The little dots are indicators for loading.
Well, I messed that explanation all up. Here's what the book says, and this is right. When the film counter reaches 10, the transportation locks. That's your warning that you've reached the last frame on the roll. You release the transport by pushing the film transport release, that's the little lever on the right, upward in the direction of the arrow to activate the film transport. At the next stroke, 3 red dots will appear on the frame counter. On the next stroke, 2 red dots, then 1 red dot, and finally the word load. At that point in time, the exposed film has been fully wound up into the take-up reel. You remove the film back and lift the film off the take-up spindles. Then when you reload a fresh roll of film, you advance the film again, and now it will appear 1 green dot in the frame counter. You repeat this procedure on the next stroke, 2 green dots in the frame counter. On the third stroke, the number 1 will finally appear in the frame counter, and that's when you're ready to take your first exposure.
Pretty cool little camera.
I forgot to mention that the shutter release button has a lock function, so the green indicator means you can release the shutter, and if you rotate it a little, that little lever on the right, a little counterclockwise, then it locks the shutter so you can't accidentally take a picture. Although I can't imagine that you would be stuffing this camera in your pocket or your jacket pocket and ever accidentally take a photo.
As always, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video.